Good evening. A very warm welcome to all the participants in today's webinar. This is our 67th webinar. A special welcome to our program director and speaker for today, Shri Krishnapani K.C. Raju. Before we introduce our speaker today, for those who were not here earlier and have joined us today, Ritambra Wellness is a collective of like-minded individuals that look at wellness in a holistic way, not just the body, but the mind as well, and all through the practice of knowledge and wisdom that comes from our ancient Indian scriptures and heritage. We conduct corporate programs and retreats for wellness that look at personal transformation and tapping into oneself to unlock our infinite potential. Presently, we are conducting these programs virtually, and our virtual corporate programs are uploaded on our website, rutambrawellness.com. Do visit our website and go through the details of these programs. We also conduct webinars regularly on topics that delve into self discovery, personal transformation, health, harmony, and holistic well being, as well as the arts, which help connect us with our higher selves. All our earlier talks are uploaded on YouTube under Rotambara Wellness. If you'd like to be part of our community, the details of where you can connect with us are posted on the chat. Alternately, please post your contact details, cell number, email ID, and we can add you to our groups. So let's get on with today's program. Sri Krishnapaniji will be talking to us on Jiddu Krishnamurti, the man and his message. For those who need some introduction and information on J. Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti was born on 11th May 1895 and left his body on the 17th of February 1986. He was a philosopher, speaker, and writer. He stressed the need for a revolution in the psyche of every human being and emphasized that such revolution cannot be brought about by any external entity, be it religious, political, or social. But we'll get much more from Sri Krishnapaniji today. Today's session will have 45 minutes of talk, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. A request to all of you to stay muted through the talk and keep your videos on. Feel free to post your questions on the chat function, and Krishnapaniji will answer any question in the realm of what is spoken today. A little bit about Krishnapaniji and his interest in J. Krishnamurti. Krishnapaniji is a mechanical engineering graduate with professional qualifications in management and law. He has more than 41 years of experience in industry and academia. Currently, he runs his own consulting and trading businesses. Study and research in ancient Indian philosophical and spiritual literature is his passion. He's engaged in synthesizing ancient and modern thought on deeper aspects of life and its purpose. He's a keen student of Vedanta, Theosophy, and Jiddu Krishnamurti's teachings, which is why he's speaking to us on that subject today. Krishnapaniji, as you all know, is the program director at Rutambara and the enabler for the spiritual and transcendental dimensions of holistic well-being at Rutambara. So thank you so much, Krishnapaniji, and we look forward to your session. Over to you.
Thank you, Binaji, for that wonderful introduction of the subject. And as Binaji just mentioned, next Wednesday, which is 17th of February 2021, happens to be the 35th death anniversary of Jiddu Krishnamurti. And I think it is fitting in one way of paying our tribute to him or remembering him, because undoubtedly Krishnamurti was one of the greatest beings of the 20th century. I'm deliberately using the term beings because I don't want to use terms such as speaker, teacher, thinker, philosopher, and so on. He was all these things and much beyond that also. And I think it would be appropriate to say that he was a true human being in the true sense of the term. So, the greatest advantage which Krishnaji had as compared to many others is that we have intact all the talks, writings, audios, videotapes, and personal memoirs of so many others, which was not the case with others. So we have authentic, genuine, direct talks and writings of Jiddu Krishnamurti available to us as compared to any other person in history earlier. So with that advantage, we are able to get into what we can call as the uh, consciousness of Krishnamurti, some kind of a study of the consciousness of Krishnamurti is possible. For instance, the very discovery of Krishnamurti way back in 1910, around that time, by the leaders of the Theosophical Society at that time, especially C.W. Leadbeater and Annie Besant. It is said, and it is recorded in his biography written by Mary Lucians, which was done with the consent and approval of J. Krishnamurti. That biography was written by Mary Lucians, in which it is very clearly mentioned that Leadbeater, who was a clairvoyant, when he saw the aura, when he saw the aura of Krishnamurti as a young boy of about 13 or 14 years, he found that there was not even an iota of the identification of the self as we normally find in other cases. And it was also discovered that he had a what is normally called as a vacant mind. In fact, for any human being, even boys and girls of maybe 10, 12 years, the mind is very active. But in his case, it was found that here is a person who had a vacant mind and not an iota of the self manifesting in him. That was of the greatest attraction to Leadbeater in discovering Krishnamurti, because as a boy, he was a very dark South Indian Hindu boy, malnourished, with unkempt hair and crooked teeth. And for all appearances, he was less than ordinary. But then, these two factors of a vacant mind and there being no manifestation of what is called as the self or the I, as we understand, was the reason for his discovery. And sometimes Krishnaji himself, later in his life, much later in his life, when they questioned about his past and about his being discovered by the leaders of the then Theosophical Society, he would very genuinely say that he did not remember much about any of these things. And sometimes when there was an insistence on knowing who Krishnamurti was, he himself would put a question and say, is K a biological freak? And he says that who is K is a question or a matter for others to find out. Because he himself was not demonstrating any of the aspects which would lead to knowing or identifying a person. Sometimes, very aptly, it is mentioned that he is an uncompromising and unclassifiable teacher. The term teacher is attached to him, but he was more interested in talking about the teaching rather than the teacher. He would always insist that the teaching is more important and not the teacher. A teacher or a guru, he would only say, is a pointer. It is for the individual to undertake the journey. Quite clearly, several times, he declared that people do not need guidance, they need awakening. They don't need guidance in any manner, they only need to be awakened. And he would insist upon going into oneself without any dependency on anything external to oneself. In fact, he would say that anything based on another person's experience, especially in the matters of the psyche or of an inner life, has no meaning at all. He said there's absolutely no meaning. It doesn't make any sense at all to base one's own understanding on somebody else's experience. Okay, you may depend upon somebody for physical things. You may depend upon somebody to take you somewhere. You need to go somewhere, and obviously you need the help of somebody. But when it came to matters of the psyche or one's own inner self, he would vehemently oppose and say that it is totally meaningless and it has no bearing at all, and maybe it could be very misleading in such a case. Very interestingly, if one reads the talks of Krishnamurti or reads his books starting from the 1930s to the 1980s, the core of his ideas, which he has presented and discussed for almost 6 decades, remained the same. Fundamentally, there was no change. But his idiom changed. He expanded the ideas. He has keenly listened to great scientists and sociologists and psychologists and so many others to expand his own understanding, and he brought in that idiom and that understanding into his talks, but essentially the core remained the same. This is one thing which we can very easily see in JK. And insistently, several times he was asked as to who are you? Then he would put the question back to them and say, sir, it's more important to know who you are than trying to know who I am, because that's of no relevance to you. Who I am has no bearing to your understanding. When he was asked this question, who are you? Very genuinely, he would answer, sir, I am nobody. I have absolutely no identity as you understand or as you imagine. And very interestingly, when he was asked while discussing some subject as to what do you think, then he gave a very typical answer and said, Sir, K doesn't think, K only sees. He would always refer to himself in the third person as K. And he said, Sir, K doesn't think, which is a very, very strange thing. As I said, this goes back to the correlation with his discovery of having a vacant mind. So there was, see, for him, the process of thinking was quite alien, or one could say quite artificial in one respect, as it is very natural to us. What seems to be very natural to us, for him, it was something maybe which he had to do with a lot of effort. And his natural state of his being was that of a vacant mind. So the Krishnamurti as the man is something in one respect inscrutable. We know about his biography, we know about his background, that he was born on 11th May 1895, which itself is again doubtful. Because when he was questioned about his date of birth, he simply would say, Sir, this is the uh, date of birth in my passport. This is the date of birth given in my passport is this. That's what I know. I really do not know if that's correct or not, but that was the date given in the passport. So, as a person, if one wants to really understand, one needs to go into, I would say, a study in Krishnamurti consciousness as such. Because knowing a person from a physical point of view, or from a very mundane point of view, generally about what we talk about the biography of a person or something like that, has no relevance at all in understanding who a person truly is. You may have some idea about a person by knowing his age, his qualifications, his background, his family, and things like that. But in the case of a person like JK, all these things were totally irrelevant. These things were absolutely irrelevant. But we are told, if we go through his biography, that Krishnamurti underwent certain mystical experiences that brought about a deep transformation. This was way back in the 1920s, early 20s, and something very profound that had an impact on him, a very profound impact, was the event of the passing away of his younger brother. They were very close to each other. They grew up together. In fact, Annie Besant adopted both of them. Both of them were taken to England for their higher education. And Krishnaji was very close to his brother. And the people around him insisted that nothing is going to happen to Krishnamurti's younger brother, because he was ill at that time. They assured him that he is going to live and nothing is going to happen to him. But unfortunately, the younger brother passed away. And that was a kind of a wake-up call to him to deeply understand what sorrow exactly means. So it had such a great impact that he came out of it with a totally new vision of life. And since then, there was no turning back. Another great event of significance in his life was that an organization called the Order of the Star in the East was built around him, and he was declared as the world teacher, and that the consciousness of the Maitreya Buddha, Bodhisattva, would descend into him and give a great message to this world. So an organization was created around him, and a huge following was there, and you know, so much of paraphernalia, property, assets, and people, everything was created around him uh, as the coming world teacher. But it was in August 20, 1929 that one fine morning he renounced everything, and he simply said that it has no relevance whatsoever, because that was the time when he declared that truth is a pathless land. This was on August 2nd, 1929, where he mentions that I maintain that truth is a pathless land, and that you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. So therefore, he said there's no point in creating an organization here. And right from the beginning, he was very clear. If there are only 5 people who will listen, who will live, who have their faces turned towards eternity, it will be sufficient. And again, he declared, why have an organization for 5 or 10 people in the world who understand? So it was quite natural for him. And in retrospect, we can understand that that was the only thing he could have done, by simply renouncing the crown or the mantle of a world teacher at the age of 34. And then onwards, he was free to go around and talk to people in their millions over the next 60 years, till he died in uh, February 1986. That was on the 17th of February. As I said, this happens to be the week. The next Friday, Wednesday happens to be his 35th death anniversary. And that it's good that we are meeting today to uh, try to get a glimpse of the man and the message. I wouldn't like to dwell too much on the personality of Krishnamurti, because his personality would be revealed uh, more through his teachings and the core of the concepts or ideas which he presented to humanity for consideration. For him, they were not concepts or ideas. It was the truth for him. And very interestingly, in that meeting on August 2nd, 1929, at the camp held at Omen in Holland, he makes a very important statement and says, I want to set humanity unconditionally free. My only concern is to set men absolutely unconditionally free. And you know, the reason he said for this was because I am free, unconditioned, whole, not the part, not the relative, but the whole truth that is eternal. And therefore, I desire those who seek to understand me to be free, not to follow me, not to make out of me a cage which will become a religion, a sect. Very early on, the statement emphasizes that he was eternally free, unconditioned, and whole. Now, before I actually embark upon discussing some important aspects of uh, his message, I just want to mention that certain terms like the observer is the observed, the thinker is the thought, choiceless awareness, emptying of the content of one's own consciousness, all these have unfortunately become cliched and have lost the profundity and the sacredness of their meaning. He would always insist upon saying that the description can never be the described. Any amount of description would only be words and words. And he would insist upon saying, do you carry that fragrance with you? Or is it only that you carry a bunch of words? There was a question that was raised after his death also was whether Krishnamurti was a disappointed man at the time of his death. Because it seems that he said that he wanted to see the kind of transformation which he underwent or which was possible for him in others. And it seems he said that unfortunately he didn't find that in anybody even close to him. But I think that may not be a statement true completely, in the sense that each one who came into contact with him carried some of the fragrance, some of that beauty with them. May not be completely, but yet I think it was truly transforming in many people. And he was the one who actually opened a new dimension of human consciousness, which was hitherto undiscovered and untouched by anybody. That was the great contribution. And he insisted upon this and said, if it's possible for one, it would definitely be possible for everybody else. And it's not something mysterious or strange or something that happens to only a few. It happens only to a few because of the fact that one hasn't prepared oneself to receive it adequately. There is no adequate preparation from a deeper point of view. And therefore, one might have remained superficial or did not carry that impact to a deeper level to bring about that great transformation of which he talked about. Now, coming to the message part of it, there were a few statements which are very profound, which we need to examine very carefully. One such statement was that all life is a movement in relationship. He would say that all life is a movement in relationship. And that relationship is the mirror in which we can see ourselves as we are. There is no escape from relationship. In that relationship, which is the mirror in which we can see ourselves, we can discover what we are, our reactions, our prejudices, our fears, depression, anxieties, loneliness, sorrow, pain, grief. This is from the book called The Freedom from the Known, where he talks about all life is a relationship, is a movement in relationship. The point is, do we have that courage to see ourselves in the mirror of relationship without justifying, without condemning, without accepting, without rejecting, without coming to conclusions, and see what is as what is? Because that needs tremendous energy. That needs a great amount of attention, as he called it as. With that attention, if we are able to see, we will see the truth of our own self. Don't look for, or don't look at the mirror with some kind of an expectation. In fact, the psychologists have found out through experimentation that each one, when he looks himself in the mirror, it seems he appears to be 3 or 4 times more beautiful or more handsome than what he is actually. So the mind is also conditioned in such a way that I can't even see myself physically as what is, let alone the psychological me. So the what he would call as the looking, listening, and learning of what is of tremendous importance, and it needs a great passion, a great intensity, a tremendous amount of energy and honesty to do that. This is a profound statement which is, I would say, applicable to every human being who is seriously trying to understand who he is or discover a deeper dimension of oneself. Because he said the what the looking at or seeing what is as it is itself liberating and itself brings about a great transformation. And the second aspect, coming back to this as the idea of relationship, he goes on to say that the demand for safety and security in relationship inevitably breeds sorrow and fear. This is what the mind does. In every relationship, we try to seek some kind of safety and security. That very seeking implies that one is insecure. Why do I seek security? Because there is some element of insecurity and fear in me constantly being a part of me. So that demand for safety and security is what inevitably brings about or breeds sorrow and fear. This is where one needs to go into oneself very deeply. And he says that most of us want security of loving and being loved. But is there love when each one of us is seeking his own security, his own particular path? We are not loved because we don't know how to love. And he gives a very beautiful analogy. And he says, when we close the windows and doors of our house and stay inside, we feel very secure, safe. But life is not like that. Life is constantly knocking at our door, trying to push open our windows that we may see more. And if out of fear we lock the doors, bolt all the windows, the knocking only grows louder. The closer we cling to security in any form, the more life comes and pushes us. Look at the insight of that person about life. In fact, this is what we face every day. But having become insensitive to the whole process of life, we are stuck in a very small corner of our own self, our own being, which is self limiting and self enclosing, and we miss the vastness of life. That immensity of life is lost because we are stuck in a small corner of our own being with our own desires, jealousy, envy, greed, safety, security, and cruelty, and whatnot. That appears to be very natural to us, and we are thereby self-enclosed. There's nothing binding us from outside, but we are binding ourselves and then tying ourselves into knots and never be able to open up and see that vastness of life. And very beautifully, he says, the closer we cling to security in any form, the more life comes and pushes us. The knocking only grows louder. And the third statement, which I want to mention as a part of his message is he would talk about meditation as one of the greatest arts in life, perhaps the greatest. There's no technique, there is no authority to it. There is nothing to practice, nothing to come about through some process. And in fact, there is a very interesting statement he would make saying that meditation is when the meditator is not. He would say that what we call as meditation is in our own daily living. And that happens to be the greatest art in life. It has no technique and therefore no authority. When you learn about yourself, watch the way you walk, how you eat, what you say, the gossip, the hate, the jealousy. If you are aware of all that in yourself without any choice, that is part of meditation. So meditation can take place when you are sitting in a bus or walking in the woods full of light and shadows, or listening to the singing of the birds, or looking at the face of your wife or child. This is again from the book Freedom from the Known. Unfortunately, nowadays we have so many techniques about meditation, so many authorities on meditation, so many forms of meditation, so many teaching shops for meditation, and they promise all kinds of things through that meditation. But it only strengthens the image which I have created in my mind of what I call as the I. So it's not actually what I would say as eliminating the meditator. It's only strengthening the meditator and creating a false impression of being in meditation. Similarly, he would insist upon the art of living as the greatest art, greater than all things that human beings have created by mind or hand, greater than all the scriptures and their gods. It is only through this art of living that a new culture can come into being. This is not a philosophy. It is exactly what the word philosophy means: the love of truth, the love of life. This is from the book, The Whole Movement of Life is Learning. The whole movement of life is learning. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, he insisted upon the three things of looking, listening, and learning. And he would say that learning happens in the present, in the moment. It has nothing to do with past, because all accumulation is a mental process which is always in the past. Because whatever experience we have, the mind automatically converts it into knowledge and stores in memory. And whatever is in memory can never be in the present, it can only be in the past. So these three dimensions of all life is a movement in relationship. The demand for safety or security in relationship inevitably breeds sorrow and fear. And that meditation is one of the greatest arts in life, perhaps the greatest art, where there is no technique and therefore no authority. And meditation can happen wherever we are, and you can actually experience that in our daily life, in our relationship, in whatever situation we are. There are several other things which I don't want to go into because of paucity of time. My only purpose is to give a flavor of the profound message of Jiddu Krishnamurti. And the next aspect which I want to mention here is his uncanny ability to pierce the veil of human psyche and of time and look into the future of humanity. If you see, he passed away in 1986 when there was computers were very rudimentary. They were just beginning to come about, and there was no internet at all. Nobody knew about anything called as internet or mobile telephony or what are all the technologies which we have today. They were not there at all. But then still he had a very, I would say, a very uncanny insight into these things, and he makes a mention of it. He makes a mention of it and says about computers. He says, scientists are now inventing the ultimate intelligent machine, a computer which will beat man in every way. If the machine can take over all the operations then that thought does now, then what is going to happen to the mind of man? He says there are only two possibilities. Either man will commit himself totally to entertainment, football, sports, going to the temple and all that stuff, or he will turn inward. He said these are the only two possibilities. And we know for certain today that what possibility the whole humanity has adopted, what option the humanity has taken today. And with the same thing, he knew about the duality of fear and pleasure. He would say that fear and pleasure are the two sides of the same coin. They're not different. And the pursuit of pleasure becomes the most important thing because it obviously follows one's own fears of losing out on things. And the fear of looking at oneself in totality. And that is where he says that there's another very interesting insight into the future. He says when the industry of entertainment takes over, when the young people, the students are constantly instigated to pleasure, to romantic sensuality, the word restraint and austerity are pushed away. When you have been brought up from childhood to escape from yourself through entertainment, religious or otherwise, you naturally enter more and more into the world of sport, amusement, all helping you to escape from yourself. This is from the book Krishnamurti to himself. Look at the insight of JK. Today we are absolutely totally into entertainment. Nothing else matters. And the mobile telephony, the internet, and everything has put us on the path of entertainment right from our childhood, which is seen to be as an escape from oneself, as an absolutely easy way to escape from ourselves, because it's very difficult to face oneself. It is very disturbing. If one tries to look at oneself, one may discover one's own stupidity, one's own foolishness, and one's own superficial attitude towards life. So one doesn't want to look at oneself. And the best way is to escape into entertainment. And that's what is provided amply by the modern technologies that are available today. Then, another important aspect which he talked about was losing touch with nature. This is also a great insight into the future of humanity, because he says if you lose touch with nature, you lose touch with humanity. If there is no relationship with nature, then you become a killer. Then you kill baby seals, whales, dolphins, and man, either for gain, for sport, for food, or for knowledge, would do this. Then nature is frightened of you, withdrawing its beauty. You may take long walks in the woods or camp in lovely places, but you are a killer and so lose their friendship. In fact, this pandemic is a clear evidence, a demonstrable event which has shown us that nature can simply withdraw all its beauty and leave us with so much of ugliness, so much of fear. Life in all aspects is disturbed. And we are truly faced with an ugly situation. Why? Because we have exploited nature to its limits and completely destroyed it. And therefore, he doesn't hesitate to say that you become a killer. Whatever you may do, you may go to the forest, you may walk in the woods, you may camp there, you may try to say that I am enjoying nature and I am one with nature and all that in all the lovely places. But he says, still you are a killer and so lose their friendship. So we have lost touch with nature. And imagine, he said this sometime in 1980s, and within a small span of about 35, 40 years, this has become a terrible reality to us. This was the kind of great insight into the future, which Jiddu Krishnamurti had, because he was operating at a level of consciousness where oneness with the whole humanity and oneness with nature was a great reality to him, and it was that truth in which he lived. And that is where we see the stark difference. Because, you know, what happens is that we have become totally insensitive. And the more the manifestation of this ugliness of nature in its various forms coming about around us, we seem to have become more and more selfish, more and more withdrawn, more and more confined, instead of opening up, becoming more sensitive, and creating a sense of oneness with our surroundings. It's a very typical case, even in my house, when my wife and my son, three of us are sitting, each one is engrossed in his own mobile phone, his or her mobile phone. I keep telling them, the three of us are sitting in the same room and living in one's own world, totally alien to the surroundings, totally unconnected with the surroundings. So we have completely lost that touch with nature, and we have therefore lost touch with humanity. This was the insight of the person who could very clearly pierce the veil of time and look into the future of humanity through the development of the so-called science and technology and the exploitation of nature and the overpowering, the way in which we are caught in this entertainment business. We want entertainment in everything. Sensationalism, being out of touch with reality. And we do not actually understand the terms which he used. of what he called as love, what he called as compassion, what he has called as the other, the immensity, the sacredness. All these things are lost to us. Maybe if it's time for us to rediscover ourselves and try to maybe grasp that, or uh, you know become sensitive to that fragrance of the totality of life, the vastness of life. And sometimes he would say that even sorrow or grief, you can hold it in your palm like a precious jewel and examine it from all dimensions and go beyond it. So it's a question one needs to answer, pose and answer to oneself. What is it that we have actually learned from the teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti? Have I found that jewel, or am I going away only with lot of words which become meaningless when I am not sensitive enough in my relationship to humanity and to nature as a whole? Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the interruptions in between, but we're now open to have some discussion. I see some chat here. Let me look into it. I don't know this person. It's Galaxy 8 or something. The name is not displayed here. It says JK said thinker is a thought and thought is at the root of all human suffering. So as I understand, thought creates illusory existence as opposed to being, as you emphasize, that is seer, that is nobody to think. Now see, again, sir, I would very humbly request to go beyond the words. When you say thinker is the thought, Krishnamurti poses a very interesting question and says, is there a thinker when there is no thought? This is what we need to examine. So, is there a thinker when there is no thought at all? And there's an interesting dialogue between Jiddu Krishnamurti and Professor David Bohm in the book called The Awakening of Intelligence. The title of that talk is also, the dialogue is also The Awakening of Intelligence, where he poses this question about thought and the thinker, and he goes beyond it, and at one point he says the source of intelligence and thought is one and the same. And when he says intelligence, he's talking about that transcendental dimension, which we may call it by any other name, something which is beyond thought, where thought has no real role to play, where only that intelligence operates. He says the source of thought and intelligence is one and the same, and that thought has isolated itself through the seeking of security. So that is where the whole, I would say the whole, the manifestation of the I, the creation of these images through the thought process occurs, and we always remain with the images, we strengthen those images, we multiply those images, and we interact through those images only, and therefore we are never in direct touch with reality. He would go to the extent of saying that you don't know your wife, you don't know your husband, because he is not the same person. He or she is not the same person. But you have built up that image and crystallized that image, And you are only looking at that person through that image and not really looking at the other person to know who that person actually is. That is the powerful impact of thought and the images it creates. And a very pertinent question to be examined, not to be answered. As he would always insist, the answer is in the question itself. The solution is in the problem itself. Don't search for the solution or the answer beyond or outside the question or the problem. It is to look at the problem very deeply, and you will find the solution for it within that problem itself. And therefore, it is important to hold it in our consciousness and examine this question whether there is a thinker without the thought. If there were to be no thought, is there a thinker at all? This is what he, in a different context, he would use that term called as the content of consciousness. He would say that I am nothing other than the content of my own consciousness. And he poses a question and says, can we empty the content of our own consciousness? Can we empty that content? That is what is important. So I think it's a pertinent point, but we need to go into it more deeply. The other question is, or a statement that is made is about disappointed, just like Kabir Das. No, it's not actually that he was disappointed, but in a way he could see the fact that the transformation which he expected was not really to be seen. But as it is, I have mentioned in some other context about it and said that what Krishnamurti has actually done is he has sown these seeds in human consciousness, which when you find the right soil and the right environment for it, they will sprout and become huge trees, which maybe today we are not able to understand, but maybe 2 generations later, people would be able to actually connect it to it more easily. In fact, that's what happened in the later part of his life. In the late 70s and early 80s, a lot of youngsters used to come to him and try to understand the larger dimension of life and the purpose of life. There is another by Galaxy Notebook. I don't know this gentleman. If he can identify himself, it would be right. Am I right to consider there would be no Guru Shishya separation in a strict sense, because observer is the observed, and that is why JK emphasized you are your own Guru. See, we have actually created a dichotomy. We have actually created a dichotomy by making a differentiation, saying that I know and you don't know. I know and you don't know. In fact, I was told that there is a joke in the IITs. When a fellow at the age of 17 cracks the IIT entrance and joins the institution, he is so proud of himself because he is one of those rare, elite amongst the students who could crack the IIT and go into the institution. It seems he would feel, as a newly admitted student, he would feel that I know and the professor doesn't know. But when he comes to, after his BTech, if he continues with his MTech, he finds out that I don't know and the professor maybe knows something. But the truth of the whole matter is revealed to him when he joins the PhD program, where he very clearly knows now that neither the professor knows anything nor I know anything. So this dichotomy is a strange thing which was created for the sake of superiority, for the sake of authority, by dividing people into saying that I am the one who knows and you are the one who do not know. That is the division that was created through this Guru Sishya Parampara. There is inherently nothing wrong in the Guru Shishya Parampara as such. But the moment you bring into play your role as an authority, then the whole process becomes destructive. If you actually go into the ancient traditions of India and see some of the beautiful mantras that are there, it is very clearly said. One of the very famous Shanti mantras says, Sahana avavatu, Sahana bhunaktu, Sahaviryam karavavai. There's no division. The mantra says, let us both together be protected. Let us both nourish together. Let our study, which is being carried out together, that is you and me, become invigorating, become more enriched. Tejasvinavadhitamastu. Let our study of the two of us together become enlightening, and let there be no hatred amongst us, between the two of us. Navidvishavahai. Now, where is the division between the Guru and the Shishya here? The true tradition was something different. And what was the tradition of Dakshinamurti, who is considered as the Guru of all Gurus? The tradition of Dakshinamurti very beautifully says that here is a Guru who gives a silent discourse. And the Guru is always young, who symbolizes eternal wisdom. Eternal wisdom has no age. It is ever new. And the seekers of that wisdom are old. And the Guru, who is symbolized as Dakshinamurti, who is an embodiment of that eternal wisdom, is not talking. He is giving a silent discourse. And all the doubts and difficulties of all the seekers of that wisdom are dispelled. Chitram vatataror mule vruddhashishyaha gurur yuva. Gurostu maunam vyakhyanam shishyastu chinna samshaya. He says, oh wonder, it's such a wonder that under this great banyan tree, Chitram vatataror mule vruddhashishyaha. The shishyas are vruddha. They are old. The seekers of wisdom. Gurur yuva. The Guru is youthful because he symbolizes that eternal wisdom. Guros tu maunam vyakhyanam.
I have a few. Sorry.
Silent discourse.
I have a few comments to make.
Who is this, sir?
This is Santosh Mishra.
Okay. Who is this Galaxy Note 8? Is it you, sir, who have put this?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm not on Galaxy.
Okay. No, I just wanted to know the identity of this gentleman because his only the displays of his mobile phone.
Sir, I have messaged you. My name is Subramanyam.
Oh, your name is Subramanyam. I have not gone down, sir. Okay, sir.
Very well said on Guru Sishya Parampara. It's wonderful that we realize the destructive nature when we really stamp the authority more than the message.
Yes. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much,
sir. Mishra ji, can you
There are a few things which are very profound, but there are a few things which are in contradiction to Vedanta or the path we follow. For example, when we say it is a pathless land,
yes,
we have followed, say, path of yoga, Ashtanga yoga. These are all paths. Right. But the pathless land and we following the path of yoga become contradictory.
No, it's not a contradiction. See, path implies a process which the mind can understand. It is only from a mental perspective that you understand a path. But the path applies to one who identifies himself as separate from that path, which according to Vedanta is an illusion. The very identity of a separate entity is an illusion, isn't it, according to Vedanta?
Yes, yes.
So, what is being identified separately as an illusion is creating the path. You understand the point, sir?
Mm.
So, the illusory I is identifying a path and finding it convenient to traverse that path. It means that the mind is being divides itself into two aspects. One part of the mind says that I must follow a path and I must control my emotions, I must control my thoughts, but both are in the realm of the thought only. So this division is an artificial division where one part of the mind wants to dominate and become the authority or the owner and dictate to the other part of the mind what to be done, what is to be done. See, if you go deeper into yoga, I'll come to the Yoga Shastra. What is the definition of samadhi given by Patanjali? Tadevarthamatra nirbhasa swarupa shunyamiva samadhi is the sutra of the Yoga Sutras.
Yes, yes.
He describes dharana as deshabandhas chittasya dharana. Dhyana as tatra pratyayikatanata dhyanam.
Dhyanam.
The third one, when he comes to it, what is that is remaining? There is neither the object nor the subject. There is no jnata, there is no jnaya. There is no knower and there is no object to be known. What is only the jnana. Arthamatra nirbhasa and swarupa shunya. The swarupa has become shunya. That means your identity has become totally null. As though you are nothing. Then only you are in a state of samadhi. Now in this, where is the path, sir? The path is only preparatory.
That's right. That's right.
The path is only preparatory. But if you give too much of importance to the path, you will forget to traverse on the path or to transcend the path. Isn't it? So
Okay.
in Vedanta also, I think it's in the Chandogya Upanishad where it says Nanyah Pantha Ayanaya Vidyate. There is no path. Nanyah Pantha Ayanaya. There is no other path to go. It's a statement of the Upanishads. They themselves have very clearly said that truth is a pathless land because you can't approach it by any path. How do you come to Paravidya? See, that is the difference.
Meditation.
Meditation is not a path. Meditation is not a means. That's why Krishnaji said meditation is when the meditator is not. If you hold on to the meditator, there can never be meditation. There can be an illusion of meditation. There can be a false sense of the person saying that I am meditating. But the very forgetfulness of the person, the identity of the person, leads you into true meditation. The path of yoga, majority of it is preparatory. There is the Bahiranga part of it. Yamaniyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara is all Bahiranga, is external. External in order to prepare yourself to do this. See, I am very fond of giving this example of pole vaulting. You know, a person who is doing pole vaulting holds on to a pole and the pole helps him to reach a particular height. Now, after having reached that height, the pole becomes the biggest hurdle. He has to drop the pole and then jump onto the other side. Isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Now, this pole is like your learning, your knowledge, your mind, all your practice. All your practice can only lead you up to a certain level. At that point, unless you drop it, you cannot go to the other side. That's why the statement is, use the mind to transcend the mind. Manayeva manushyanam karanam bandhamokshayoho. Bandhaya vishayasaktam nirvishayam muktam smrutam. As long as you are caught in this web of your thought process and your objectification of the whole world, you are tied up, you are bound to it. And what is the root cause of it? It is the mind. It is the mind which causes this problem. So therefore, you cannot transcend it with the known. And that's the beauty of Jiddu Krishnamurti. As I mentioned in this book, The Awakening of Intelligence, there are two dialogues with one Swami Venkateshananda, where Krishnamurti has given a totally new dimension and a new insight into the very term Vedanta. Vedanta, he translates into English and says the ending of the known. Because Anta means ending. Veda means what is known. So you have to end the known. And this is exactly the Upanishadic statement which says, Ve vidya veditavye, paracha aparachaiva. There are two kinds of vidyas. And what is vidya? Vidya is defined as savidya ya vimuktaye. That is vidya which actually is liberating. And moreover, the Upanishad itself classifies all Vedas, Vedangas, Upanishads, everything as Aparavidya. That was the great honesty and the courage which the Upanishadic sages and seers had to declare that all this is Aparavidya. The Paravidya is again what the Mandukya says. Adrushtam, Avyavaharyam, Agrahyam, Alakshanam, Achintyam, Avyapadesyam. Pratyayekatmasaram, Prapanchopashamam, Shantam, Advaitam, Sa Atma, Savigneya. If you go into it, see, why I'm saying all this is because I have made a deep study of Krishnamurti and the Upanishads. How he is like a great Upanishadic seer. This stems from the very fact that Krishnamurti, it seems, asked one of the trustees called Pandit Krishnanath. He was a trustee of the Krishnamurti Foundation, and Krishnaji asked Pandit Krishnanath, who himself personally told me that, can somebody translate my talks into Upanishadic Sanskrit? Was the question which JK put to this gentleman. And he himself revealed it to me. That was a trigger to me. It was several years back. That was a trigger to me and kept me, I started thinking, why did Krishnamurti say this? Is there a very deep connection with his philosophy, with his teachings and the Upanishads? And I have found several statements in the Upanishads, which if you translate into English, without giving the reference or the source, it may appear to be like statements of Krishnamurti. So you see, it is very easy. It is the later distortion. It is the later assumption of authority, which has created this dichotomy between the Guru and the Sishya. Krishnamurti would always insist saying that, can we talk like two concerned friends? Can we be like close friends who are really concerned about humanity and take a walk in the woods and examine these questions deeply? He would always insist and say, can we go together? Are we together? Are we, or am I crossing you over and going away and you are left behind? No. He said, I'm always waiting for you. I'm always waiting for you to join me in this walk. Now it's up to you to come to me. It's like saying the river won't come to the person who is thirsty. The river is there for everybody. You may come for sport, you may come for swimming, you may come for quenching your thirst, or you may come to build a dam or totally spoil the river, or you may do whatever you like. But I am like the river, he said. I'm always flowing and available for everybody. It's like the fragrance of a flower in the forest. The flower does not wait for passers-by and people who come for a walk there and say that whenever somebody passes by, then only I'll release my fragrance. It doesn't do that. It is its natural state of being is to give out fragrance. Now, if we miss out on it, we miss out on it. That's all. Nothing beyond it.
The other point is
Yes.
that as we see, the humanity is going towards entertainment and thrill.
Right.
Whereas the school of theosophy believes that the spirituality is going to expand.
Yes.
Maybe that you would know better whether the spirituality is actually expanding or it's the entertainment that is expanding.
Sir, it will come to a tipping point. The tipping point we might not have reached yet. See, he would always say that an experience of deep sorrow could be a great revelation where you come in contact with the truth. It's not that we invite sorrow or we invite grief and we invite pain and trouble, but the way one is leading one's life, pain and grief and sorrow is inevitable. So unless we come to the tipping point, humanity as a whole, if it has taken a wrong turn, it has to come to a tipping point where it realizes its own falsity of the way it has chosen. But there is a deeper thing also. If you see, in spite of so much of chaos, so much of violence and cruelty and destruction and the addiction to entertainment, there's a great band of people. There's a great band of humanity, a silent humanity, which is seriously questioning all the paradigms of modern life.
Yes.
So that has a greater impact. See, for example, if we are hardly 15 or 20 people here in today's talk. But that doesn't make any difference.
In fact,
Krishnamurti himself said, why do I need an organization for 5 or 10 people? If there are 5 or 10 serious people, they would bring about a transformation in humanity. And they don't wantonly or with great effort work for the transformation of humanity. He said, you become free, then it will have a great impact on the whole of humanity. See, there is a beautiful statement by Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi was often questioned on this, and he said, the greatest service any human being can make to the whole of society, to the whole of humanity, is to become a liberated person. That is the greatest service anybody can do to humanity.
Yes.
So it is your responsibility and my responsibility to bring about the transformation in ourselves. With that great transformation, there is a great chance of bringing about a transformation in humanity, in the very psyche of humanity, at a much deeper level than what people might realize, actually. Isn't it?
Yes.
See, if you see the life of all the great sages and seers and saints and so on and so forth, they had very little impact during their lifetimes. Whether you take the Buddha or whether you take Jesus Christ, during their lifetime, their impact was very limited. But later on, through the seeds which they have sown in human consciousness, they have sprouted and their thought has become very important today. Even today, after 2000 years, 2500 years, we study Buddhist literature. We go deeply into what he said in the Dhammapada. There are people who find answers to several of their questions, doubts, and difficulties in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Bible. So we need not worry about it, sir. We need not worry much about this. What is more important is, am I serious enough to bring about the transformation in me? Do I have the tremendous passion and the tremendous energy and that intensity required to bring about the transformation through seeing what is? The what is itself transformational, he says.
Thank
Okay,
you.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, there is one this thing by observation by Ramchandranji. Sirji, namaskar. Easy to understand Vedanta, but to capture the depth of Krishnamurti's mind, I find it very, very difficult. The revelations you give remain on the surface at high level and difficult to go deeper, perhaps lack of introspection. See, the only point, sir, is we are afraid to be alone. In our quest for spirituality, in our quest for a deeper meaning of life, we always try to find a support. Is it Advaita Vedanta or Dvaita Vedanta or Vishishtadvaita or something else, this marga or that marga? We are always in search of crutches. We are always in search of climbing onto the shoulders of somebody and doing piggybacking. I want to piggyback and become a liberated person. There cannot be anything more foolish than that. Why we find Krishnamurti difficult is not because what he is saying is difficult. In fact, what he is saying is the most simplest thing. Because we are complicated, we are unable to understand it. Because we have made a huge complication within ourselves. Our minds are complicated, our thoughts are complicated, our desires are complicated, our actions are complicated. So this whole complication has created a mindset which is unable to accept anything simple. That is our problem. I want to depend on somebody to explain things. I want to depend on somebody to interpret Krishnamurti for me. I want to depend on somebody to who can interpret Vedanta to me. I want somebody to interpret Yoga Shastra, Darshana to me. But we are not willing to go directly to it because we don't want to make the effort. As I said, the preparatory effort we don't want to make. When we don't want to make that preparatory effort and we don't have the tremendous energy to face the truth of what is, if I start looking at myself very seriously, I find so much of ugliness whereby I am terribly afraid of it and I will shut that door. I don't want to see myself. I want to seek solace somewhere else. Somebody says, no, sir, everybody will be finally liberated, so don't bother. That's a good idea, sir. Somewhere or the other, somehow or the other, sometime or the other, I'll be free. How does it help you, sir? You are talking about a timeless dimension. You are talking about something which is beyond space, time, and causation, and expect it to happen in time. That is the difficulty, sir. That is the difficulty. Things, if they are made easy, it only means that they are misleading. Don't look for an easy way out. Face the hard fact. Look at it directly. Don't justify, don't condemn, don't accept, don't reject. That's what Krishnamurti often used to say. Look at the fact as it is, the truth of it. I am violent. I am cruel. I am jealous. I am envious. I am greedy. That is my inner nature, which I am unwilling to face. And therefore, the mind projects non-violence, gratitude, goodness, beauty, and all kinds of nonsense which are non-existing in me. So what is the fun of looking at something which is non-existing, creating an ideal which is beyond you? Because that gives a comfort level. That gives a sense of security, a sense of comfort. But that is the most dangerous thing. The mind, when it's unable to face itself, creates all kinds of illusions and images and tries to divert the whole thing. Is it okay, Sir Ramchandranji? Or not? You are not happy with what I said?
Hard to think about, Sarji.
No. Any amount of thinking will not lead anywhere, sir. Let me be very frank and open and brutal. Any amount of thinking is not going to lead anywhere. Thinking will only become complicated. Can we empty the content of our whole consciousness? Don't again question as to what will happen then, because that's a question again coming from the mind. When you empty the content of your consciousness, accept whatever comes.
That is what samadhi is.
Yes, that's precisely what they said, but we misinterpreted it.
And samadhi can happen for a limited time.
No, it has nothing to do with time, sir. See, you are in a timeless state, but if your body brings you back into the lower level of consciousness, it will start again operating in the lower level of consciousness. That's all. Because you are tied to your body, it may appear as though you have been in a state of what you call as samadhi, and then coming back into it. It has nothing to do with time. It is Dikkala Janavachinananta Chinmatra Murti. You are in a state of which is beyond Dik and Kala. It is pure consciousness, Chinmatra. And Swanubhuti Ekamana, it says it is something which can happen only through your own experience, which Krishnamurti right from the beginning insisted. He said, anything based on another person's experience in matters of the psyche or of an inner life has no meaning at all. How does it matter, sir, whether you are in samadhi or somebody else in samadhi when I am grossly involved in this world? It doesn't make any sense to me. It has no meaning to me. I am hungry. How does it matter if somebody has constipation and somebody is overfull or somebody has eaten up to his throat? Does it help me in any way by knowing that? So this inability to stand alone, Krishnamurti again put a question. He said, suppose you are the only person in this world, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You please tell me. Suppose you are the only person, you have nobody to talk to, you have nobody to consult, you have nobody to ask any question. Nothing is left to you. You are the only person. How are you going to act? Another very interesting question which was put by Krishnamurti is, if you had only 1 hour to live, what would you do, sir? He asked a person. This is in the Commentaries on Living, the 3rd volume, which says, if you had only 1 hour to live, what would you do? The person says, I really don't know. Then Krishnaji says, would you not arrange what is necessary outwardly, your affairs, your will, and so on? Would you not call your family and friends together and ask their forgiveness for the harm that you might have done to them, and to forgive them for whatever harm they might have done to you? Would you not die completely to the things of the mind, to desires and to the world? And if it can be done for an hour, then it can also be done for the days and years that may remain. That is samadhi. Living every moment of your life fully, without the burden of the past. That itself is liberation. So why talk about time at all? Because the time as a dimension is what the mind is used to. It has no relevance if you are living every moment of your life. Living in the present, living in that moment is itself liberating. You are totally free of the burden of the past. So that is where we fail to see. The mind either lives in the past or lives in the imagination of the future. It never lives in the moment. Because there is no line called as the present at all. The line which is artificially drawn as the present is so thin, intangible, and invisible that we don't know what the present moment is. So we either live in the past memories or in the imagination of the future. And you cannot imagine a future of which you have no idea. So you only project your past as into the future. How can one imagine the future when he has no experience of it in any manner? So he can only make some cosmetic changes of the past and imagine that to be the future. Beyond that, nothing happens.
You're right.
So that is precisely what Krishnaji is talking about. And in fact, he has directly gone to the core of things and brutally, ruthlessly cut away everything which is superfluous, everything which is of no consequence, and went to the root of it. And that's where he identified the truth and said, this is what it is. You don't need anything else. I think we have exceeded our time much far. There is one, Kanchan Gogateji. I have a question. Yes, please. Can you ask?
Yes.
Rishmiji, can you hold on for a few minutes? Yes. Kanchanji?
Yes, I would like to speak. Thank you for your exploration. Actually, I'm pursuing PhD right now on the speeches of Jiddu Krishnamurti, trying to explore. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right now, I'm pursuing PhD on Krishnaji's speeches. And one thing which I'm trying to find out is the transformation, the value of transformation in the speeches of Jiddu Krishnamurti. I'm trying to approach it the way Krishnamurti has said it, because I don't want to have any, I'm doing it under English literature. I don't want to apply any framework of literary criticism to Krishnamurti, because that would be doing injustice to him.
Right.
But like you said, that there are so many parallels we can see. Krishnamurti did not encourage any comparative study, definitely. But still there are so many parallels that are there between Indian tradition and Krishnamurti. So you have said you have done that not comparative study as such, but you have found parallels in Upanishads and Krishnamurti. So do you have anything, I mean, have you documented something like that, or any book or something, if you can share?
No. It's only my personal study. I have some notes here and there, and some references which I have noted. Maybe I need some more time to work on it. But when you are talking about Krishnamurti and transformation, I would like to draw your attention to the 1974 San Diego talk between Jiddu Krishnamurti and Alan W. Anderson.
Yes.
Anderson. This is a 1974 dialogue on knowledge and the transformation of man. So this could be a very interesting thing. And there is also a talk about the wholly different way of living. This was of 18th February 1974. Krishnamurti talks about a wholly different way of living, knowledge and transformation. See, he had talked about knowledge and transformation because you said your topic is about transformation. I would draw your attention to these conversations with Alan Anderson, and also his talk on a wholly different way of living. There are some other references I can give you. Maybe if you want, I can share my mobile number, and we can have you can contact me so that I can give you some more insights into it.
Yes, I will just, definitely I'm interested. Yeah.
I'm trying to be very presumptuous. I may or may not be able to really help you, but maybe if mutually, if we can discuss and if it really helps you, then I'll be able to, it'll be beneficial for both of us. I'm just sending my my mobile number to you personally. It is 7893222219. I hope you have received it. I have received your mail ID gogate.kanchan@gmail.com. So we can interact on that. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Have you got my number, madam?
Yes, yes, I got it. I just
Oh.
copied it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a
Many-
lot. We can discuss it personally so that we don't drag everyone into that
Yeah,
discussion.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
If there is nothing much further to discuss, I think we can close this session. Okay, Reshmi. So
Yes.
I would like to thank all the participants for being very patient with me with some interruptions here and there, and also dragging it on for more than 1.5 hours. Thank you very much, all the participants, and thank you, Reshmi and Ritambara Wellness, for organizing this. Thank you, and a good night to all of you.
Thank you, Krishna Fani ji. Just making a couple of announcements for our upcoming programs. On Sunday, 14th February, we have a yoga program by Umesh Thagat ji starting from 7 a.m. onwards. It's based on Boost Your Immunity. And on Friday, 19th February, we have a very special program by Dr. Sangeeta Balaprakash on detox with Ayurveda. All the details will be posted on the WhatsApp group. Please block your dates for the upcoming programs. Please make a note, we will not be live on Friday, 26th of February. At Ritambara, we look forward to your presence every Friday, where we bring to you interesting topics on holistic wellness and the arts, delivered by a host of distinguished, knowledgeable speakers. Thank you once again for your presence and participation from all of us at Ritambara. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.